The autumn wind cut through Sarah's worn jacket like a blade as she hurried across Prospect Park, her daughter Emily's small hand warm in hers. Dead leaves crunched beneath their feet, releasing the earthy scent of decay that always reminded Sarah of endings, lost jobs, broken promises, empty refrigerators. The setting sun painted the Brooklyn skyline in shades of amber and blood, casting long shadows between the oak trees. "Mom, look." Emily's voice carried that particular note of concern that made Sarah's chest tighten. At 8 years old, her daughter possessed an uncanny ability to spot trouble, or perhaps suffering, from a mile away. Sarah followed Emily's gaze to a figure slumped against the base of an ancient elm. Even from a distance, she could see the man's expensive suit was torn and stained, his dark hair disheveled. His head hung forward at an angle that suggested unconsciousness, or worse. "We should call someone," Sarah murmured, already reaching for her phone. The smart thing would be to dial 911 and keep walking. She had enough problems without adding a stranger's crisis to her list. But Emily was already tugging her forward, her sneakers scuffing against the asphalt path. "He might be hurt, Mom. Really hurt." The man's breathing was shallow, barely visible in the growing dusk. As they drew closer, Sarah caught the metallic scent of blood mixed with something else, something that made the hair on her arms stand on end. His clothes, though rumpled and dirty, were clearly expensive. Italian leather shoes, now scuffed and torn. A watch that probably cost more than Sarah made in 3 months. "Sir?" Emily's voice was gentle but firm. "Are you okay?" The man's head lifted slowly, revealing a face that belonged in old paintings, sharp cheekbones, pale skin stretched tight over aristocratic features. But it was his eyes that made Sarah's breath catch. They were the color of winter storms, gray and deep, holding centuries of weariness that no young face should carry. His voice was cultured, with an accent Sarah couldn't place. British, maybe, or something older. "I seem to have lost my way." Sarah's maternal instincts warred with her survival instincts. Everything about this man screamed danger, the predatory grace even in his weakened state, the way shadows seemed to gather around him despite the streetlights flickering on. But Emily was already kneeling beside him, her small hand hovering near his shoulder with the careful concern of someone who understood pain. "What happened to you?" Emily asked, and something in her innocent question made the man's carefully controlled expression crack. He paused, his gray eyes flickering between Sarah and Emily as if weighing secrets against necessity. "I was betrayed by someone I trusted, someone who was supposed to protect our family." The word family hit Sarah like a physical blow. She knew that particular brand of betrayal, the way it hollowed you out and left you stumbling through parks at sunset, lost and bleeding. "Come on," she heard herself saying, the words tumbling out before her rational mind could stop them. "You can't stay here. It's getting cold and—" She gestured at the darkening park, where shadows were beginning to move in ways that didn't quite match the swaying branches. The man, Michael, he'd introduced himself as Michael Hayes, looked up at her with something that might have been surprise. "You don't know me. You don't know what I am." "I know you're hurt," Sarah replied, extending her hand. "And I know my daughter won't sleep tonight if we leave you here." Michael's fingers were ice cold when they closed around hers, but his grip was steady as she helped him to his feet. He moved with fluid grace despite his obvious weakness, like a dancer or a fighter. The kind of man who was dangerous even when wounded. As they walked toward the park's exit, Sarah noticed things that made her pulse quicken. The way Michael's eyes constantly scanned their surroundings, as if expecting attack. How he positioned himself between them and every shadow, every rustling bush. The careful way he breathed, as if each inhale was a conscious decision. "Where do you live?" she asked as they reached the street, immediately regretting the question. She was a single mother in Brooklyn with barely enough money to keep the lights on. The last thing she needed was to bring a stranger home to their tiny apartment. But Emily was looking up at her with those enormous brown eyes, her father's eyes, though Sarah tried not to think about that. And Michael was swaying slightly on his feet, his pale skin taking on a grayish tinge that spoke of blood loss or shock. "I don't—" Michael's voice was barely a whisper. "I don't have anywhere to go. Not anymore." Sarah's apartment was a fourth-floor walk-up in a building that had seen better decades. The stairs creaked ominously under their combined weight, and she found herself apologizing for the peeling paint, the flickering hallway lights, the smell of Mrs. Rodriguez's perpetual cooking that permeated everything. "It's not much," she said, fumbling with her keys. "But it's warm, and I can make some soup." Michael paused in the doorway, his hand gripping the frame with white knuckles. For a moment, Sarah thought he might refuse, might turn and disappear back into the night. Instead, he stepped across the threshold with the careful deliberation of someone crossing a significant boundary. "Thank you," he said, and there was something in his voice that made Sarah think he hadn't said those words in a very long time. Emily immediately set about making their guest comfortable, dragging pillows from the couch and chattering about school and her drawings while Sarah heated canned soup on the ancient stove. But she kept watching Michael from the corner of her eye, noting how he seemed to grow stronger just from being inside, how his color improved with each passing minute. "You should eat something," Sarah said, setting a steaming bowl in front of him. "You look like you haven't had a decent meal in days." Michael stared at the soup for a long moment, something unreadable flickering across his features. "I have specific dietary requirements," he said carefully, "but thank you. Your kindness is more nourishing than you know." As the evening wore on, Sarah found herself studying Michael's face in the lamplight. There was something timeless about his features, something that didn't quite fit with his apparent age. And his eyes, those storm-gray eyes, seemed to hold depths that spoke of experiences far beyond anything a normal person should have lived through. "Mom," Emily whispered, tugging at Sarah's sleeve. "Look at his hands." Sarah glanced over and felt her blood turn to ice water. Michael's hands, which had been pale but normal when they'd found him, now showed a network of dark veins beneath the skin. As she watched, his fingernails seemed to lengthen slightly, taking on a subtle point that definitely hadn't been there before. Michael must have sensed her stare because he looked up, meeting her eyes across the small living room. For a moment, his carefully human mask slipped, and Sarah saw something ancient and predatory looking back at her. "Sarah," he said, her name rolling off his tongue like a prayer or a warning. "There are things about me you need to understand, things that will put you and Emily in danger just by knowing them." The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Outside, Sarah could hear sounds that didn't belong in Brooklyn, footsteps that were too light, too fast, moving across the fire escape with inhuman precision. "What are you?" Sarah whispered, even as part of her already knew the answer. Michael's eyes flashed with something that wasn't quite human, and when he smiled, Sarah caught a glimpse of teeth that were definitely too sharp. "I am the king of the Night Clan," he said quietly. Or I was until my own brother. The window exploded inward in a shower of glass and shadow, and Sarah's scream died in her throat as she saw the figures pouring through the opening. Their eyes glowed like embers in the darkness, and their movements were liquid grace and deadly intent. "Found you!" one of them hissed, and Sarah realized with crystal clarity that her simple act of kindness had just dragged her and Emily into a war they couldn't possibly understand. Michael was on his feet instantly, placing himself between Sarah's family and the intruders, but she could see the weakness still trembling in his limbs. "Run," he commanded, his voice carrying an authority that made Sarah's feet want to move before her mind caught up. "Take Emily and—" The lead assassin's claws raked across Michael's shoulder, tearing through his shirt and drawing lines of dark blood. Sarah grabbed Emily's hand and bolted for the kitchen, her heart hammering against her ribs as inhuman snarls filled their tiny apartment. Behind them, Michael's voice rose in what sounded like an ancient language, commanding and desperate. "The fire escape," Sarah gasped, yanking open the kitchen window. The metal grating groaned under their weight as they scrambled onto the narrow platform. Below them, Brooklyn stretched out in a maze of lights and shadows, suddenly feeling like foreign territory. Emily's small fingers dug into Sarah's palm. "Mom, what are those things?" Before Sarah could answer, Michael appeared at the window, his face pale but determined. Blood seeped through his torn shirt, but he moved with renewed strength, as if the violence had awakened something dormant in his system. "This way," he said, leading them up the fire escape rather than down. "They'll expect us to run to the street." Sarah's legs burned as they climbed, the October wind whipping through her hair and carrying the scent of rain. Behind them, she could hear the creatures, vampires, her mind supplied with surreal clarity, tearing through her apartment. The sound of splintering wood and shattering dishes made her stomach clench. Everything she'd worked for, destroyed in minutes. They reached the roof as the first drops of rain began to fall. Michael pressed them against the brick wall of the building's elevator housing, his body shielding them from view. In the distance, Sarah could see the glittering lights of Manhattan, a world away from the nightmare unfolding on this rooftop. "I'm sorry," Michael whispered, his breath visible in the cold air. "I should have left the moment I felt strong enough to walk. I should never have—" "Don't." Sarah's voice was sharper than she intended. "Don't you dare apologize for accepting help when you needed it." Michael's storm-gray eyes searched her face. "You don't understand what you've gotten involved in. My brother, Damien, he's not just trying to kill me. He's using our clan's resources to traffic human blood through a network of fake blood banks. Sterling Corporation is just a front for feeding operations that span the entire East Coast." The words hit Sarah like physical blows. Blood trafficking, feeding operations. The man she'd brought into her home, given soup to, let Emily comfort. He was part of something monstrous. "How many people?" she asked, her voice barely audible over the rain. "Hundreds, maybe thousands." Michael's jaw tightened. "I discovered the operation 6 months ago. When I tried to expose it to the clan elders, Damien convinced them I was the one who'd gone rogue. They stripped me of my crown, my power, and cast me out to die." Emily pressed closer to Sarah's side, her young mind clearly struggling to process the conversation. "Are you one of the bad vampires?" she asked Michael with the directness only children possessed. Michael knelt to Emily's level, rain dripping from his dark hair. "I've done terrible things in my long life," he said quietly, "but I've never fed on innocence. never hurt children. That's why Damien wanted me gone. I was interfering with his profits. A crash from below made them all freeze. The assassins had found the fire escape. "We need to move," Michael said, rising to his feet. "There's an old subway tunnel entrance in the cemetery. If we can reach it—" "No." Sarah's voice cut through the night like a blade. "No more running. Emily, baby, I need you to listen to me very carefully." She knelt beside her daughter, rain soaking through her thin jacket. Emily's brown eyes were wide but steady, trusting in the way that broke Sarah's heart and gave her strength simultaneously. "Remember what I taught you about emergencies? About being brave when things get scary?" Emily nodded solemnly. "I need you to be the bravest you've ever been right now. Can you do that for me?" Another nod, this one more determined. Sarah pulled out her phone, her fingers shaking as she scrolled through her contacts. "Mrs. Rodriguez has been asking me to let Emily sleep over for weeks. I'm going to call her, and you're going to go downstairs and stay with her until this is over." "Mom, no." Emily's voice cracked. "I won't leave you." "You have to." Sarah's throat felt like it was closing. "Because if something happens to you, I won't be able to live with myself. And if something happens to me, I need to know you're safe." Michael stepped forward, his expression tortured. "Sarah, you don't have to." "Yes, I do." She stood, facing him with rain streaming down her face. "You said your brother is trafficking people, human people. That means somewhere out there, families like mine are being destroyed while monsters get rich off their suffering." The sound of footsteps on metal grew closer. 3 flights down, maybe 4. "I've spent my whole life being afraid," Sarah continued, her voice growing stronger with each word. "Afraid of losing my job, afraid of not being able to pay rent, afraid of being alone. But I'm not afraid of doing the right thing. Not anymore." She dialed Mrs. Rodriguez's number, her hands steady now. The conversation was brief, conducted in urgent whispers. Their elderly neighbor, bless her, asked no questions beyond, "How long? And should I call the police?" "Not yet," Sarah replied. "Give us 2 hours. If we're not back by then." She didn't finish the sentence. Couldn't. Emily clung to her as they made their way back down the fire escape, avoiding the floors where inhuman voices echoed through broken windows. At the 2nd floor, Sarah helped her daughter climb through Mrs. Rodriguez's kitchen window, the familiar smells of garlic and cumin a stark contrast to the supernatural chaos above. "I love you, baby," Sarah whispered, kissing Emily's forehead. "More than all the stars in the sky." "I love you too, Mom." Emily's voice was small but fierce. "Come back to me." When Sarah climbed back up to the roof, Michael was standing at the edge, looking out over the city like a king surveying his lost kingdom. The rain had intensified, turning the world into a watercolor painting of lights and shadows. "They're in the building," he said without turning around. 5 of them, maybe 6, all trained killers, all loyal to Damien. Sarah joined him at the ledge, her stomach lurching at the drop below. "So what do we do?" "We?" Michael turned to face her, something like wonder in his expression. "Sarah, you've already done more than anyone had the right to ask. You saved my life, gave me shelter, showed me kindness I didn't deserve. But this isn't your fight. It became my fight the moment I decided to help you." Sarah's voice carried a conviction that surprised even her. "Besides, you're not exactly in fighting shape, are you?" Michael's laugh was bitter. "I haven't fed properly in weeks. Without blood, I'm barely stronger than a human." Certainly not strong enough to take on 6 assassins. Then we'll have to be smarter than them. The roof access door exploded open behind them, and Sarah's heart stopped as the creatures poured out into the rain. In the dim light, they looked almost human, until they smiled, revealing fangs that gleamed like ivory daggers. "Hello, brother," the leader said, his voice carrying the same aristocratic accent as Michael's. "You've led us quite a chase." Damien was tall and lean, with the same sharp features as Michael, but none of the weariness. His eyes held a cruel intelligence that made Sarah's skin crawl. He wore an expensive suit that somehow remained pristine despite the rain, and when he moved, it was with the fluid grace of a predator who had never known defeat. "And you must be the human who's been harboring our fugitive king," Damien continued, his gaze sliding to Sarah with obvious contempt. "How charitable of you." "Leave her out of this," Michael said, stepping protectively in front of Sarah. "Your quarrel is with me." "Oh, but she's already involved, isn't she?" Damien's smile widened. "The moment she chose to interfere in clan business, she became a loose end, and we both know how I feel about loose ends." Sarah felt her courage wavering as the other vampires spread out, cutting off any escape routes. Their eyes glowed in the darkness, reflecting the city lights, like the eyes of hunting cats. She could smell something metallic and wrong emanating from them, the scent of old blood and older violence. "The Sterling Corporation blood banks," she said suddenly, the words tumbling out before fear could stop them. "How many people have you killed?" Damien's expression shifted to one of mild interest. "Killed? My dear woman, we don't kill them. That would be wasteful. We simply harvest what we need and return them to their lives. Most of them never even remember visiting our facilities." "Most of them?" "Well, some are more resilient to memory modification than others. Those unfortunate souls tend to have accidents." His casual tone made Sarah's blood run cold. "Car crashes, muggings gone wrong, sudden heart attacks. The beauty of modern urban life is that tragedy is so commonplace." Michael's hands clenched into fists. "You're talking about innocent people, families, children." "I'm talking about cattle," Damien snapped, his cultured facade cracking to reveal something monstrous underneath. "Something you never understood, even when you wore the crown. We are apex predators, Michael. We don't apologize to our food." The rain was coming down harder now, turning the rooftop into a treacherous landscape of slick surfaces and shifting shadows. Sarah could feel water seeping through her jacket, chilling her to the bone, but the cold was nothing compared to the ice in her veins as she truly understood what they were facing. "The clan elders," Michael said, his voice tight with controlled rage. "Do they know what you're really doing?" "The elders know exactly what they need to know," Damien replied. "That our operations are more profitable than they've been in centuries, that we're expanding into new territories every month, that the old ways of hunting and hiding are obsolete." He gestured to the city sprawling below them. "Look at all those lights, brother. 8 million people, and most of them so isolated, so disconnected, that they could disappear for days before anyone noticed. We're not monsters. We're entrepreneurs." Sarah felt something break inside her chest, a dam of fear and helplessness that had been holding back a flood of pure, incandescent rage. She thought of Emily sleeping safely in Mrs. Rodriguez's apartment, of all the other children who might not be so lucky, of families torn apart by creatures who saw human beings as nothing more than resources to be exploited. "You're right," she said quietly, her voice carrying clearly despite the rain. "You're not monsters." Damien raised an eyebrow, clearly surprised by her response. "Monsters act on instinct," Sarah continued, taking a step forward. "They kill because they have to, because it's their nature. But you're something worse. You're evil by choice." The temperature around them seemed to drop even further, and Sarah realized that the other vampires were responding to her words with barely controlled fury. Their eyes blazed brighter, their movements becoming more predatory, more agitated. "Careful, human," Damien warned, his voice taking on a dangerous edge. "You're already living on borrowed time." "We all are," Sarah replied, surprised by her own calm. "The difference is, I'm not spending mine destroying other people's lives." Michael moved closer to her side, and she could feel the tension radiating from his body like heat from a furnace. "Sarah," he murmured, "what are you doing?" "Buying us time," she whispered back, then raised her voice again. "How long do you think this can last, Damien? How long before someone notices the pattern? Before the authorities start investigating Sterling Corporation?" Damien's laugh was like breaking glass. "The authorities? My dear woman, half the police precincts in the city have officers on our payroll. The other half are too overworked and underfunded to investigate anything more complex than street crime." "But the families will notice," Sarah pressed on. "The people who love the ones you're taking. They'll keep asking questions, keep pushing for answers. And eventually, they'll have accidents too." Damien cut her off. "Just like you're about to." He nodded to his companions, and Sarah felt her brief moment of courage crumble as they began to close in. Their movements were synchronized, predatory, the result of centuries of hunting together. She and Michael were outnumbered, outmatched, and running out of roof. "Wait," Michael said suddenly, his voice carrying a note of authority that made even Damien pause. "You want to kill me? Fine, but do it properly. Challenge me for the crown, as is our law." Damien's eyes narrowed. "You were stripped of the crown, brother? You have no right to invoke clan law." "The elders stripped me of my authority, not my bloodline," Michael replied. "I am still of the royal house, still your brother, still entitled to trial by combat if accused of crimes against the clan." Sarah could see the calculation in Damien's expression, the way he weighed the political implications of refusing a formal challenge. Around them, the other vampires shifted restlessly, clearly eager to finish this but bound by laws older than the city itself. "Very well," Damien said finally. "I accept your challenge. When you lose, and you will lose, the human dies with you." "And when I win," Michael countered, "you'll call off your assassins and face judgment from the true elders, the ones you haven't corrupted with blood money." Damien's smile was all teeth and malice. "Agreed." The two brothers faced each other in the center of the rooftop, rain streaming down their faces, their expensive clothes plastered to their bodies. Sarah pressed herself against the elevator housing, her heart hammering as she realized she was about to witness something ancient and terrible. Michael moved first, his weakened state evident in the slight tremor of his hands, but his technique flawless. He struck with the fluid precision of someone who had been trained in combat for centuries, his fist connecting with Damien's jaw in a blow that would have shattered human bone. Damien barely staggered. He retaliated with inhuman speed, his claws raking across Michael's chest and drawing fresh blood. The scent of it seemed to energize the other vampires, their eyes blazing brighter as they formed a circle around the combatants. "You're weak, brother," Damien taunted as they circled each other. "Weak from hunger, weak from sentiment, weak from caring about cattle." Michael didn't respond, conserving his energy for the fight. But Sarah could see the truth in Damien's words. Michael was slower than he should be, his movements lacking the supernatural grace she'd glimpsed earlier. Without proper feeding, he was fighting at a severe disadvantage. The battle was brutal and swift. Damien's superior strength and speed allowed him to land blow after punishing blow, while Michael's attempts at counterattack grew increasingly desperate. Blood, dark and thick, pooled on the rooftop, mixing with the rain to create crimson rivulets that ran toward the gutters. "This is how it ends," Damien said, his hand closing around Michael's throat as he lifted his brother off the ground. "Not with the glory you always craved, but with failure. Your precious humans will die, and Sterling Corporation will expand into every major city in the country." Sarah watched in horror as Michael's struggles grew weaker, his face turning gray from lack of oxygen. The other vampires were practically vibrating with anticipation, their hunger for violence barely contained. And then she remembered the phone in her pocket. Her fingers found the device with desperate precision, scrolling through her contacts until she found the number she needed. The call connected on the second ring. "911, what's your emergency?" "This is Sarah Jenkins at 1247 Prospect Avenue, apartment 4B, she said, her voice carrying clearly across the rooftop despite her attempt to whisper. "There are armed intruders in my building. Multiple suspects, possibly gang-related. They've already destroyed several apartments and are threatening residents." Damien's head snapped toward her, his eyes blazing with fury. "Clever girl. But human authorities can't help you now." "Maybe not," Sarah replied, ending the call. "But they can help the people in those Sterling Corporation blood banks. Because I didn't just call 911, I called the FBI tip line 20 minutes ago and told them everything you just confessed to." The lie rolled off her tongue with surprising ease, and she saw doubt flicker across Damien's features. Around them, the other vampires exchanged uncertain glances. "You're bluffing," Damien said, but his grip on Michael's throat loosened slightly. "Am I?" Sarah pulled out her phone again, showing him the call log. "Agent Martinez was very interested in hearing about Sterling Corporation's unusual business practices, especially when I mentioned the missing persons reports that seem to cluster around your blood bank locations." She was improvising now, building on fragments of crime shows and news reports, but the fear in the vampire's eyes told her she was hitting close to home. "Even if you kill us," she continued, "it's too late. The investigation has already started, and when they find those people, the ones you've been harvesting, do you really think your memory modification will hold up under FBI interrogation?" Damien released Michael, who collapsed to his knees, gasping for air. "You have no idea what you've done," he snarled. "I know exactly what I've done," Sarah replied, surprised by the steadiness of her own voice. "I've given those people a chance to go home to their families." The sound of sirens began to rise from the streets below, growing louder with each passing second. Red and blue lights painted the nearby buildings in alternating colors, and Sarah could hear the distinctive rumble of multiple police vehicles converging on their location. "We need to go," one of the other vampires said urgently. "If the humans find us here—" "The humans are the least of our concerns," Damien cut him off. "If she's telling the truth about the FBI, then Sterling Corporation is compromised. The elders will want answers." He turned back to Sarah, his expression a mixture of rage and grudging respect. "You've bought yourself some time, human, but this isn't over. My operations span multiple states, and I have resources you can't imagine." "Then you'd better use them to disappear," Michael said, struggling to his feet with Sarah's help. "Because when the true elders learn what you've done, how you've endangered our entire species with your greed, they'll make what I wanted to do to you look merciful." Damien's smile was cold as winter. "We'll see, brother. But remember, every day you delay is another day innocent people suffer. Can you live with that weight?" Without another word, he and his companions vanished into the night, moving with inhuman speed across the rooftops until they were lost in the maze of Brooklyn's skyline. Sarah found herself alone with Michael, both of them soaked to the bone and shaking from adrenaline and cold. "Is it true?" Michael asked quietly. "Did you really call the FBI?" Sarah shook her head, suddenly exhausted. "I called 911 about the break-in, but the rest was a bluff. I don't even know if there really is an Agent Martinez." Michael's laugh was weak but genuine. "You may have just saved hundreds of lives with that bluff. Damien will have to shut down the Sterling operations, at least temporarily. That gives us time to—" "Us?" Sarah interrupted. "There is no us, Michael. This ends here." Something flickered across Michael's features. Pain, disappointment, understanding. "Of course. You're right. You've already risked far too much." "No, you don't understand." Sarah moved closer, her hand finding his arm. "It doesn't end here because I'm walking away. It ends here because we're going to finish it properly." Michael stared at her as if she'd spoken in a foreign language. "Sarah, you can't possibly mean—" "I mean exactly what I said." The sirens were getting closer now, and Sarah knew they had only minutes before the police reached the roof. "You said the true elders, the ones Damien hasn't corrupted, would want to know about the blood trafficking. So we're going to tell them. It's not that simple. The clan hierarchy, the politics involved. Then we'll figure it out," Sarah cut him off. "Together. Because you're right about one thing. Every day we delay is another day innocent people suffer. And I can't live with that weight either." Michael's storm-gray eyes searched her face in the dim light. "You have no idea what you're agreeing to. The vampire world is dangerous, political, full of creatures who would kill you without a second thought." "Sounds like Brooklyn," Sarah replied with a wry smile. "Besides, I've got advantages they don't expect." "Such as?" "I'm human, I'm angry, and I've got absolutely nothing left to lose." The roof access door burst open as the first police officers reached their level, flashlight beams cutting through the rain. Sarah grabbed Michael's hand, feeling the supernatural strength in his fingers even in his weakened state. "This way," she whispered, leading him toward the fire escape on the building's far side. "Mrs. Rodriguez's nephew is a cop. If we can get to him before the others—" But as they reached the edge of the roof, Sarah saw more police cars pulling up to the surrounding streets. Red and blue lights bathed the entire neighborhood, and she realized with growing dread that they were completely surrounded. "Sarah Jenkins, NYPD," a voice called through a megaphone. "We know you're up there. Come down slowly with your hands visible." Sarah felt Michael tense beside her, his body coiling like a spring. "I can get us out of here," he murmured, "but you'll have to trust me completely." "What do you mean?" "I mean hold on tight and don't look down." Before Sarah could ask what he was talking about, Michael swept her into his arms and stepped off the edge of the building. Her scream died in her throat as they plummeted toward the street. the city lights blurring into streaks of color around them. But instead of the bone-crushing impact she expected, Michael's feet touched down on the fire escape of the adjacent building with cat-like grace. He leapt again, carrying them across another gap, then another, moving through the urban landscape like it was his personal highway. "How are you doing this?" Sarah gasped, clinging to his neck as Brooklyn flashed by beneath them. "Vampire abilities aren't just about strength and speed," Michael replied, his voice steady despite their acrobatic flight. "We can manipulate gravity to some extent, use shadows as cover, move in ways that defy human physics." They landed on a rooftop 6 blocks away from Sarah's apartment, both of them breathing hard. In the distance, she could see the police lights still flashing, the officers undoubtedly searching an empty building. "Emily," she said suddenly, panic flooding her system. "I need to get back to Emily." "Not yet," Michael said gently. "The police will be watching your building for hours, and Damien's people might be waiting for us to return." Sarah felt tears of frustration burning her eyes. "Then what do we do? I can't just leave her there." "We make sure it's safe first," Michael replied, "and then we figure out our next move." He led her to the rooftop's edge, where they could see the lights of Manhattan glittering across the East River. The rain had finally stopped, leaving the air clean and sharp with the promise of winter. "The clan elders meet in a place called the Crimson Court," Michael said quietly. "It's hidden beneath the city, older than the subway system, protected by magic and tradition. If we can get there, if I can present evidence of Damien's crimes—" "What kind of evidence?" "Financial records, witness testimony, proof of the Sterling Corporation connection." Michael's jaw tightened. "The problem is, most of that evidence is in Damien's hands, and the few humans who might testify are either dead, missing, or have had their memories altered." Sarah was quiet for a long moment, thinking. What about the blood banks themselves? The physical locations? What about them? If they're really just fronts for feeding operations, there has to be evidence, equipment, records, something that proves what they're really doing. Michael's eyes widened slightly. The Sterling Corporation headquarters is in Midtown. If we could get inside, access their files. That's breaking and entering, multiple felonies. Yes. Sarah looked out over the city, thinking about Emily sleeping safely in Mrs. Rodriguez's apartment, about all the other children who might not be so fortunate, about families being torn apart by monsters who saw human beings as nothing more than commodities. "When do we start?" she asked. Michael turned to stare at her, something like awe in his expression. "Sarah, you can't possibly understand what you're agreeing to. If we're caught, if Damien's people find us, then we'd better not get caught," Sarah replied. "Besides, you said it yourself. Every day we delay is another day innocent people suffer." A sound echoed across the rooftop. Footsteps, too light and too fast to be human. Sarah's blood turned to ice as she recognized the predatory grace of vampire movement. "They found us," Michael whispered, his body tensing for another fight. But as the figures emerged from the shadows, Sarah realized these weren't Damien's assassins. There were 3 of them, 2 women and a man, dressed in dark clothing that seemed to absorb light. Their eyes didn't glow with the same malevolent hunger she'd seen in the others. Instead, they moved with the careful precision of soldiers or police. "Michael Hayes," the lead figure said, her voice carrying an authority that made even Michael straighten. "By order of the True Council, you will come with us." "Counselor Thorne," Michael replied, inclining his head respectfully. I wasn't expecting... The council has been watching Damien's activities for some time, the woman interrupted. Your dramatic exit from clan politics tonight has accelerated our timeline. Her gaze shifted to Sarah, and there was something almost human in her expression. You must be the human who's been harboring our wayward king. I'm Sarah Jenkins, she replied, surprised by the steadiness of her own voice. And I'm not harboring anyone. I'm helping someone who's trying to do the right thing. Counselor Thorne's lips curved in what might have been a smile. Interesting. Most humans who encounter our kind either flee in terror or beg for their lives. Most humans haven't had their apartments destroyed by vampire assassins, Sarah replied dryly. Fair point. Thorne turned back to Michael. The council is prepared to hear your testimony regarding your brother's activities, but we'll need more than accusations. I can provide evidence, Michael said, but it will require breaking into Sterling Corporation headquarters, Thorne finished. Yes, we're aware of your plan. It's remarkably similar to the one we've been developing. Sarah felt a flicker of hope. You mean you'll help us? We mean we'll allow you to help us, Thorne corrected. The council has resources, but we lack something crucial. A human perspective. Someone who can navigate the mortal world without raising suspicion. She gestured to the city sprawling below them. Damien has been very careful to keep his operations hidden from human authorities. But he's made one critical error. He's underestimated the determination of a mother protecting her child. Sarah's throat tightened. Emily, is she... Safe, Thorne assured her. We have people watching your building. Your neighbor, Mrs. Rodriguez, is remarkably protective of children. She's already lied to 3 different police officers about your whereabouts. Relief flooded through Sarah's system, followed quickly by determination. What do you need me to do? Thorne and Michael exchanged a look that spoke of centuries of vampire politics and protocol. First, we need to get you both out of Brooklyn, Thorne said. Damien's people are scouring the borough, and the human authorities are looking for you in connection with the disturbance at your apartment. Where are we going? Manhattan, Michael replied. To the Crimson Court, where you'll learn exactly what you've gotten yourself involved in. As they prepared to leave the rooftop, Sarah took one last look toward her neighborhood, toward the building where Emily slept safely under Mrs. Rodriguez's protection. Everything she'd known, everything she'd built, was about to change forever. Are you ready? Michael asked, offering her his hand. Sarah thought about the fear that had ruled her life for so long, about the bills and the worry and the constant struggle just to survive. Then she thought about the families being destroyed by Damien's blood trafficking operation, about the innocent people who had no one to fight for them. No, she said, taking Michael's hand. But I'm going anyway. The last thing she saw before they vanished into the night was the lights of her apartment building, where her daughter slept peacefully, unaware that her mother had just declared war on monsters. But as Counselor Thorne led them across the rooftops toward whatever waited in the shadows of Manhattan, Sarah heard something that made her blood freeze. A sound like hunting horns echoing through the night, growing closer with each passing second. What is that? She whispered. Michael's face had gone ashen. A challenge horn. House Corvus. His voice dropped to something barely audible. Damien's called in the blood hunters. The hunting horns grew louder, their haunting melody cutting through the night air like razor wire. Sarah felt Michael's grip on her hand tighten as Counselor Thorne's expression darkened with something that might have been fear. Blood hunters are the clan's executioners, Michael explained quickly, his voice barely audible over the approaching sound. "They answer only to the crown, and they don't take prisoners." "But you don't have the crown anymore," Sarah pointed out, her practical mind cutting through the supernatural terror. "No," Thorn said grimly, "but Damien does, and he's just declared you both enemies of the clan." The sound of wings filled the air above them, not the gentle flutter of birds, but something larger, more predatory. Sarah looked up to see shapes moving against the clouded sky, their forms too angular to be natural. "This way," Thorn commanded, leading them toward a maintenance door that shouldn't have existed on the rooftop. As she touched the handle, Sarah heard the distinct sound of ancient metal grinding against stone, and the door swung open to reveal a staircase that descended far deeper than the building should have allowed. The air that rose from below carried scents of old stone, burning candles, and something else, something that made Sarah's skin crawl with primal recognition. The smell of predators, of creatures that had lived in darkness for centuries. "The Crimson Court," Michael said, his voice carrying a mixture of reverence and dread. "I haven't been here since you were stripped of your crown," Thorn finished. "Yes, we remember. The question is whether the court will remember you as a king or a traitor." They descended in silence, the sounds of the hunt fading above them as they moved deeper into what felt like the bones of the city itself. The staircase was carved from black stone that seemed to absorb their footsteps, and the walls were lined with symbols that hurt Sarah's eyes to look at directly. "How far down does this go?" she asked, her voice echoing strangely in the confined space. "Far enough," Thorn replied cryptically. "The court exists between worlds, in spaces that mortal architecture can't contain." After what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes, they emerged into a vast chamber that defied every law of physics Sarah thought she understood. The ceiling soared impossibly high, supported by pillars of what looked like crystallized blood. Torches burned in sconces along the walls, their flames casting dancing shadows that seemed to move independently of their light sources. And everywhere, vampires. They stood in small groups throughout the chamber, their conversations dying as Michael entered. Some watched with curiosity, others with barely concealed hostility. But all of them radiated the same predatory grace that had terrified Sarah on the rooftop, multiplied by dozens. "The exile returns," someone said, their voice carrying clearly across the chamber despite being barely above a whisper. "How interesting." At the far end of the hall, 3 figures sat on thrones carved from what looked like obsidian. Even at this distance, Sarah could feel the weight of their attention like a physical force. "The true council," Michael murmured. "Elder Blackwood, Elder Ravencrest, and Elder Nightshade. They've ruled the clan for over 1,000 years. And they're about to decide whether we live or die," Thorn added helpfully. As they walked the length of the chamber, Sarah became acutely aware of the dozens of eyes following their progress. She could hear whispered conversations in languages that sounded older than civilization, could smell the metallic scent of barely controlled hunger. "Michael Hayes," Elder Blackwood's voice boomed across the hall as they approached the thrones. He was tall and gaunt, with silver hair that seemed to move in a wind that touched nothing else. "You stand accused of treason against the clan, of consorting with humans, and of abandoning your duties as king. I stand accused by a usurper who has dishonored everything our clan represents," Michael replied, his voice carrying the authority Sarah had glimpsed on the rooftop. "And I have brought evidence of his crimes." Elder Ravencrest leaned forward, her dark eyes fixing on Sarah with uncomfortable intensity. Evidence provided by a human? How novel. This human, Michael said, gesturing to Sarah, has risked her life to expose a conspiracy that threatens not just our clan, but the entire supernatural community. She deserves your respect, not your contempt. A murmur ran through the assembled vampires, and Sarah realized that Michael defending a human so publicly was apparently unprecedented. "Speak then, mortal," Elder Nightshade commanded, his voice like grinding stone. "Tell us what you claim to know of clan business." Sarah felt her knees threatening to buckle under the combined weight of supernatural attention. Every instinct screamed at her to run, to hide, to find Emily and disappear into the anonymous masses of humanity. But then she thought of the families being destroyed by Sterling Corporation, of the people who had no voice, no protection, no one willing to fight for them. Damian Hayes is trafficking human blood through a network of fake medical facilities, she said, her voice growing stronger with each word. He's kidnapping people, harvesting their blood, and either killing them or erasing their memories. He told me himself that hundreds, maybe thousands of people have been affected. "Serious accusations," Elder Blackwood said. "But accusations require proof." "I can provide proof," Sarah replied, pulling out her phone. "But first I need to know something. Are you going to help those people, or are you going to cover this up to protect your precious clan politics?" The silence that followed was so complete that Sarah could hear her own heartbeat. Around the chamber, vampires stared at her with expressions ranging from shock to outrage to something that might have been admiration. "You dare question the council?" Elder Ravencrest's voice could have frozen fire. "You, a mere human, presume to judge our decisions?" "I presume to care about innocent people being murdered?" Sarah shot back, her fear transforming into the same righteous anger that had carried her through the confrontation with Damien. "And if that makes me presumptuous, then I'll wear that label proudly." Elder Nightshade rose from his throne, and the temperature in the chamber seemed to drop 10 degrees. "You speak of innocence, mortal. But what of the innocents who will suffer if our existence is exposed? What of the chaos that would follow if humans learned that vampires walk among them?" "What chaos?" Sarah demanded. "The chaos of people being able to protect themselves? The chaos of families knowing what happened to their loved ones? The chaos of justice?" "The chaos of war," Nightshade replied coldly. "Humans fear what they don't understand. If they knew we existed, they would hunt us to extinction. And in that war, millions would die." Sarah felt the weight of his words, the terrible logic behind them. But then she thought of Emily, of the trust in her daughter's eyes, of the simple human capacity for kindness that had led them to help a stranger in the park. "Maybe," she said quietly. "Or maybe humans are capable of more than you give them credit for. Maybe fear isn't the only response to the unknown." She gestured to herself and Michael. "I'm standing here, aren't I? In a room full of vampires, defending one of you to your own leaders. If I can do that, maybe other humans can too. One human's acceptance doesn't represent the species," Elder Blackwood pointed out. "No," Sarah agreed. "But it's a start. And it's more than Damien is offering. He's not trying to coexist with humans. He's trying to farm us like cattle." The chamber erupted in whispered conversations as vampires debated her words. Sarah could feel the tension building, could sense that they were approaching some kind of decisive moment. "Enough," Elder Ravencrest commanded, and silence fell instantly. "Michael Hayes, You claim your brother has committed crimes against both human and vampire law. Present your evidence. Michael stepped forward, his posture straightening into something regal despite his torn clothes and obvious exhaustion. 3 months ago, I discovered irregularities in clan finances. Blood acquisition costs had dropped dramatically, but our reserves were higher than ever. When I investigated, I found that Sterling Corporation, a company owned through shell corporations by Damien, was supplying blood at rates far below market value. He paused, his gaze sweeping the assembled vampires. At first, I assumed he'd simply found more efficient suppliers. But when I visited one of the Sterling facilities, I discovered the truth. They weren't buying blood. They were taking it. From willing donors? Elder Blackwood asked. From kidnapped victims, Michael replied. People lured in with promises of easy money for blood donation, then held against their will while their blood was harvested over weeks or months. Those who survived had their memories altered and were released. Those who didn't, he didn't need to finish the sentence. The implications hung in the air like a toxic cloud. When I confronted Damien about this, he claimed it was a necessary evolution of our feeding practices, that the old ways of hunting individual prey were inefficient and dangerous. He said the council had approved his methods. All 3 elders straightened at this accusation. The council approved no such thing, Elder Nightshade said, his voice carrying deadly promise. I know, Michael replied, which is why I tried to expose him. But Damien had spent months building support among the younger vampires, convincing them that I was too weak, too sentimental to lead in the modern world. When I called for an investigation, he turned it around and accused me of being the one who had gone rogue. Sarah watched the faces of the assembled vampires, seeing doubt and calculation in their expressions. This wasn't just about justice. It was about power, politics, the future direction of their entire species. The evidence you speak of, Elder Ravencrest said. Where is it? In Sterling Corporation's headquarters, Michael admitted. Financial records, facility locations, victim databases, everything needed to prove Damien's guilt and shut down his operation. Evidence that conveniently requires breaking human law to obtain, Elder Blackwood observed. Yes, Sarah said, stepping forward again. And I'm volunteering to help get it. The chamber fell silent again, but this time the quality of the silence was different. Where before there had been skepticism and hostility, now there was something like curiosity. You would risk imprisonment, possibly death, to help expose crimes against your own species? Elder Nightshade asked. I would risk anything to stop innocent people from being hurt, Sarah replied. Human or vampire? Elder Ravencrest leaned back in her throne, her dark eyes studying Sarah with new interest. You speak of humans and vampires as if we're equals, as if our lives have the same value. Don't they? Sarah asked simply. The question hung in the air like a challenge. Around the chamber, Sarah could see vampires exchanging glances, their expressions ranging from outrage to thoughtfulness. Interesting, Elder Blackwood murmured. Very interesting indeed. A new sound echoed through the chamber, the hunting horns again, but closer now, accompanied by the sound of heavy footsteps on stone. The blood hunters have found the entrance, Thorne said urgently. We need to. The great doors at the chamber's entrance exploded inward, and Damien strode through surrounded by a dozen vampires in dark armor. Their eyes blazed with supernatural fury, and Sarah could smell the scent of recent violence clinging to them like smoke. Honored elders, Damien said, his voice carrying across the chamber with aristocratic confidence. I come seeking justice for crimes against the clan. He pointed directly at Michael and Sarah. My brother stands accused of consorting with humans, of revealing clan secrets to outsiders, and of threatening our very existence with his reckless actions. And the human, he continued, his gaze fixing on Sarah with predatory intensity, stands accused of interfering in clan business and possessing knowledge that threatens our security. Elder Blackwood rose from his throne, and the very air seemed to vibrate with power. Damien Hayes, you come before the council bearing accusations, but you yourself stand accused of far graver crimes. By whom? Damien demanded, though Sarah could see uncertainty flickering in his eyes. By your brother. By this human. And Elder Blackwood's voice dropped to something barely above a whisper. By the council itself. The assembled vampires stirred restlessly, sensing the shift in power dynamics. Sarah realized that this moment, this confrontation between brothers in front of the most powerful vampires in the clan, would determine not just their fate, but the future of human-vampire relations. The Sterling Corporation, Elder Ravencrest said, her voice cutting through the tension like a blade. Explain its operations. Damien's composure cracked slightly. Sterling Corporation is a legitimate business enterprise that kidnaps humans for blood harvesting, Sarah interrupted, her voice carrying clearly across the chamber. That erases memories and disposes of witnesses. That treats human beings like livestock. Silence! Damien roared, his civilized mask finally falling away to reveal the monster beneath. You have no voice here, cattle. The word hung in the air like a slap, and Sarah felt something snap inside her chest. All the fear, all the uncertainty, all the careful deference to supernatural power, it all burned away in a surge of pure, incandescent rage. Cattle? She repeated, her voice deadly quiet. Is that what you called the mother of 3 who disappeared from the Sterling facility in Queens? Is that what you called the college student who never came home from what he thought was a paid medical study? She began walking toward Damien, her fear replaced by something far more dangerous. Is that what you're going to call my daughter when your people come for her? Sarah, don't. Michael started, but she was beyond hearing him now. You want to know the difference between humans and vampires? She continued, her voice growing stronger with each step. Humans don't need supernatural strength to be dangerous. We don't need centuries of experience to recognize evil, and we sure as hell don't need anyone's permission to fight for what's right. She stopped directly in front of Damien, close enough to see her own reflection in his predatory eyes. You made one mistake, Damien. You underestimated what a mother will do to protect not just her own child, but all children. Damien's hand moved with inhuman speed, his claws extending toward Sarah's throat. But before he could complete the strike, Michael was there, catching his brother's wrist in a grip that made bones creak. You will not touch her, Michael said, his voice carrying an authority that made even the elders sit up straighter. By right of blood, by right of challenge, by right of crown, you will not touch her. You have no crown, Damien snarled, trying to break free of his brother's grip. Don't I? Michael asked, and suddenly the air around him seemed to shimmer with power. I was born to the royal line. I was chosen by the clan. I was crowned by the elders themselves. A usurper's politics cannot change bloodline, cannot change destiny. The chamber fell silent as vampires throughout the hall began to kneel. Not all of them, Damien's supporters remained standing, but enough to make it clear that Michael's claim to authority still carried weight. "The crown recognizes its true bearer," Elder Nightshade said quietly. "The question is whether the bearer is worthy of the crown." Michael released Damien's wrist and turned to face the elders, Sarah at his side. "I propose a test of worthiness, not of strength or cunning, but of justice. Let me prove Damien's crimes. Let me expose the Sterling Corporation conspiracy, and let the clan judge which of us truly serves our people's interests." "And if you fail?" Elder Ravencrest asked. "Then I accept exile, and Sarah goes free," Michael replied without hesitation. "No," Sarah said firmly. "If we fail together. But we're not going to fail." She turned to address the elders directly, her voice carrying a confidence she didn't entirely feel. "Give us access to Sterling Corporation's headquarters. Give us one night to gather the evidence, and give us a chance to prove that humans and vampires can work together for justice instead of against each other for power." Elder Blackwood exchanged glances with his fellow council members, some silent communication passing between them. Finally, he nodded. "Very well. You have until dawn to present evidence of Damien's crimes. But know this: if you fail, if you're captured by human authorities, if you expose our existence to the mortal world, then both of you will face the final death." "And if we succeed?" Michael asked. "Then the clan will have some difficult decisions to make about its future," Elder Ravencrest replied cryptically. Damien stepped forward, his face twisted with rage. "You cannot seriously be considering—" "Silence," Elder Nightshade commanded, and Damien's voice died in his throat. "You will remain here under guard until this matter is resolved. Your bloodhunters will stand down." "This is madness," Damien protested. "You're risking everything based on the word of a human." "We're risking everything based on the evidence of our own senses," Elder Blackwood replied. "The scent of human terror clings to you, Damien Hayes. The stench of innocent blood stains your hands. Did you think the council would not notice?" As guards moved to escort Damien away, he fixed Sarah with a look of pure hatred. "You have no idea what you've unleashed," he hissed. "The Sterling Corporation is just the beginning. There are others, humans and vampires working together, who will not be stopped by your naive idealism." "Then we'll stop them too," Sarah replied calmly. "One conspiracy at a time." As Damien was led away, still protesting his innocence, Sarah felt the weight of what they'd just committed to. Breaking into a corporate headquarters, gathering evidence of supernatural crimes, doing it all before dawn. It seemed impossible. "Are you ready?" Michael asked, offering her his hand. Sarah looked around the chamber, at the vampires who watched them with expressions ranging from hope to skepticism to outright hostility. She thought of Emily, sleeping safely in Mrs. Rodriguez's apartment, trusting her mother to come home. She thought of all the families who had lost loved ones to Sterling Corporation's operations, who deserved answers and justice. "I'm ready," she said, taking Michael's hand. But as they prepared to leave the Crimson Court, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that Damien's final words had been more than just threats. There were others, he'd said. Other conspiracies, other dangers waiting in the shadows. The thought should have terrified her. Instead, as they ascended the impossible staircase back toward the mortal world, Sarah found herself thinking that maybe that was exactly what the world needed. Someone willing to face those dangers, to stand between the innocent and those who would prey on them. Human or vampire, it didn't matter. Justice was justice, and someone had to fight for it. Even if that someone was just a single mother from Brooklyn who'd made the mistake of caring too much to walk away. The Sterling Corporation building rose 43 stories into the Manhattan sky, its glass and steel facade reflecting the city lights, like a mirror of false promises. Sarah stood across the street, her heart hammering against her ribs as she studied the building's security measures through the scope Michael had somehow procured. 2 guards in the lobby, rotating patrols every 20 minutes, she murmured into the small communication device tucked behind her ear. Keycard access to the elevators, but the emergency stairs look accessible from the parking garage. I can handle the electronic security. Michael's voice crackled back through the earpiece. But we'll need to move fast once we're inside. Damien's people might have backup protocols we don't know about. Sarah adjusted the maintenance worker uniform that Counselor Thorne had provided. Apparently, the vampire underground had resources that extended into surprisingly mundane areas. The fake ID badge felt heavy against her chest, a tangible reminder of how far she'd traveled from her normal life. "Are you sure about this?" Michael asked, his concern evident even through the static. "Once we go in, there's no turning back." Sarah thought of Emily, of the promise she'd made to come home safely. Then she thought of all the families who would never get that chance if Sterling Corporation continued operating. "I'm sure," she said, checking her watch. "The shift change happens in 5 minutes. That's our window." She crossed the street with the confident stride of someone who belonged there, her clipboard and tool bag selling the illusion of legitimate business. The lobby guards barely glanced at her as she headed for the service elevator, their attention focused on a group of late-night office workers leaving through the main entrance. The parking garage was a maze of concrete and shadows, the perfect place for someone to disappear forever. Sarah tried not to think about that as she located the emergency stair access, her hands steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her system. "I'm in," she whispered into the comm device. "Heading to the 37th floor. Be careful," Michael replied. "And remember, we're looking for anything that connects Sterling Corporation to the blood banks. Financial records, facility locations, victim databases." The climb to the 37th floor left Sarah's legs burning and her lungs gasping for air. She'd thought she was in decent shape from years of running after Emily and working double shifts, but apparently scaling skyscrapers required different muscles. The Sterling Corporation offices were a study in corporate sterility. Beige walls, generic artwork, the kind of soulless environment that could hide any number of sins behind its bland facade. Sarah's maintenance uniform got her past the few late-night workers still in the building, their eyes sliding over her with the practiced indifference of people who had learned not to see the help. 37th floor, northwest corner, Michael's voice guided her through the maze of cubicles and conference rooms. "Damien's personal office should be behind the executive assistant's desk." Sarah found the office easily enough, a corner suite with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a commanding view of the city. The door was locked, but the keycard reader blinked green when she swiped the device Michael had given her. "How did you—" she started to ask. "Vampire abilities include more than just strength and speed," Michael replied. "Electronic systems respond to certain frequencies we can generate." The office was exactly what Sarah had expected from someone like Damien. Expensive furniture, original artwork, the kind of ostentatious display of wealth that screamed insecurity. But it was the wall of monitors behind his desk that made her blood run cold. Each screen showed a different location, sterile medical facilities that looked legitimate until you noticed the restraints on the examination tables, the bars on the windows, the guards stationed at every exit. "Michael," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "You need to see this." She activated the camera function on her phone, panning across the wall of monitors. Each facility was labeled with a location: Queens, Brooklyn, the Bronx, Manhattan, and others stretching down the East Coast. "Dear God," Michael's voice was tight with horror. "There are dozens of them." Sarah moved to Damien's desk, her hands shaking as she accessed his computer. The password protection was more sophisticated than she'd expected, but Michael's electronic manipulation abilities made short work of it. The files that appeared on the screen were a catalog of horrors. Spreadsheets tracking blood acquisition rates, facility operating costs, and something labeled product quality metrics that made Sarah's stomach turn when she realized it was rating human blood by age, health status, and genetic markers. "There's more," she said, clicking through folders with names like acquisition protocols and memory modification procedures. "It's not just blood harvesting. They're running experiments." The acquisition protocols folder contained detailed instructions for identifying and capturing targets: homeless individuals, runaway teenagers, immigrants without strong social connections, people who wouldn't be missed, or whose disappearances could be easily explained. But it was the memory modification procedures that truly chilled Sarah to the bone. The files described techniques for not just erasing memories, but implanting false ones, creating artificial histories that would explain away missing time, unexplained injuries, sudden personality changes. "They're not just stealing blood," she realized, her voice hollow with shock. "They're stealing lives, entire identities." "Download everything," Michael said urgently. "We need—" An alarm began blaring through the building, red lights flashing in the corridors outside. Sarah's blood turned to ice as she realized their presence had been detected. "Sarah, you need to get out of there now." Michael's voice was tight with urgency. "Security is converging on your floor." But Sarah was staring at something on Damien's computer screen that made her forget about alarms and security guards. A file labeled Phase 2 Implementation had opened automatically, and its contents made her understand that Sterling Corporation was just the beginning. "Michael, they're expanding," she said, her fingers flying over the keyboard as she copied files to the external drive. "Not just more facilities. They're planning to go international. London, Paris, Tokyo. And they're recruiting human collaborators, government officials, police commissioners, medical examiners." The sound of footsteps in the corridor was getting closer. Sarah could hear voices, urgent and professional, the kind of coordination that spoke of serious security measures. "The elevator's been locked down," Michael reported. "You'll have to take the stairs." Sarah grabbed the external drive and headed for the office door, but froze as she heard voices right outside. Through the frosted glass, she could see shadows moving, at least 3 people positioned between her and the emergency exit. "I'm trapped," she whispered into the comm device. "Window," Michael said immediately. "37th floor, northwest corner. I can reach you." Sarah looked at the floor-to-ceiling windows, at the impossible drop to the street below, and felt her courage falter. "Michael, that's a 40-story fall, even with vampire abilities. Trust me," he said simply. The office door rattled as someone tested the handle. Sarah heard the distinctive beep of a keycard being swiped, saw the lock light change from red to green. She didn't have time to think, only to act. The window was designed not to open, a safety feature that suddenly seemed like a death trap. But the maintenance toolkit included a glass cutter, and Sarah's desperation gave her hands the steadiness they needed. The window gave way just as the office door opened behind her. Sarah heard shouts of alarm, the sound of running feet, but she was already stepping out into empty air 40 stories above the street. For a moment that lasted forever, she was falling, the city lights blurring into streams of color around her. The wind tore at her clothes and hair, and she could hear her own scream echoing off the building's facade. Then strong arms caught her, and she was flying rather than falling. Michael's supernatural abilities, allowing them to glide between buildings like some impossible dream. The city spread out below them, beautiful and terrifying in its vastness. "Are you hurt?" Michael asked as they landed on a rooftop 6 blocks away from Sterling Corporation. Sarah took inventory of herself, scraped hands, a bruised shoulder, legs that felt like jelly from adrenaline crash. But she was alive and, more importantly, she had the evidence. "I'm okay," she said, holding up the external drive. "And I got everything. Financial records, facility locations, victim databases, expansion plans, everything we need to shut them down." Michael's relief was visible in the way his shoulders sagged. "Then we need to get back to the Crimson Court. The elders will want to see this immediately." But as they prepared to leave the rooftop, Sarah's phone buzzed with an incoming call. The number was blocked, but something made her answer it anyway. "Ms. Jenkins," a cultured voice said, and Sarah's blood turned to ice as she recognized Damien's aristocratic tones. "I trust you found your visit to Sterling Corporation educational." "How are you?" Sarah started, then realized the obvious answer. "You're not in custody anymore." "The council's guards are efficient, but they're not prepared for the resources I've cultivated over the decades," Damien replied smoothly. "Did you really think I would build an operation this extensive without contingency plans?" Sarah looked at Michael, seeing her own dread reflected in his expression. If Damien had escaped, if he had resources they didn't know about. "It doesn't matter," she said, trying to project confidence she didn't feel. "We have the evidence. The council will see what you've done, and—" "The council will see what I allow them to see," Damien interrupted. "You've been very thorough, Ms. Jenkins, but you've also been very predictable. Did you really think I would keep the most damaging evidence in such an obvious location?" Sarah's heart sank as she realized what he was implying. "The files are real, but incomplete," Damien confirmed. "The true scope of our operations, the full list of human collaborators, the locations of our most sensitive facilities, all of that is stored elsewhere. And now that you've shown your hand, those locations will be moved, those collaborators will be warned, and those operations will continue under new management." "You're lying," Michael said, taking the phone from Sarah. "The council has already seen enough to condemn you." "Have they?" Damien's laugh was like breaking glass. "Brother, you always were too trusting. The council sees what serves their interests. And right now, their interests lie in maintaining the status quo, not in revolutionary changes to human-vampire relations." Sarah felt the weight of failure settling over her like a shroud. They'd risked everything, gathered evidence, exposed themselves to mortal danger. And it might all be meaningless if Damien was telling the truth. "But I'm not entirely without mercy," Damien continued. "I'm prepared to offer you a deal. The human returns to her normal life, keeps her mouth shut about what she's learned, and I'll ensure that Sterling Corporation's operations avoid her neighborhood. Her daughter will be safe, her building will be protected, and she can go back to worrying about rent and groceries instead of vampire politics." Sarah snatched the phone back from Michael. "And in exchange, Michael accepts permanent exile. He leaves New York, never contacts the clan again, and spends the rest of his considerable lifespan knowing that his noble gestures accomplished nothing except ensuring more human suffering. The offer hung in the air between them like poison. Sarah could see the temptation in Michael's eyes, not for himself, but for her. The chance to give her and Emily a normal life, to remove them from the supernatural dangers that surrounded him. "No," she said firmly. "Sarah," Michael started. "No," she repeated, her voice growing stronger. "I didn't risk everything just to go back to pretending none of this exists. Those people in the Sterling facilities, the families who've lost loved ones, the victims who don't even remember being victims, they deserve better than that. They deserve to survive," Damien said coldly. "Which they won't if you continue this crusade. Do you have any idea what will happen if the human authorities discover our existence? The panic, the violence, the war that will follow?" "Maybe," Sarah admitted. "Or maybe humans are capable of more than you think. Maybe fear isn't the only possible response to the unknown. You're gambling with millions of lives based on naive optimism. And you're murdering hundreds of people based on cowardly selfishness," Sarah shot back. "At least my gamble offers hope." She ended the call and turned to Michael, seeing something like awe in his expression. "You realize what you've just done?" he asked quietly. "You've declared war on one of the most powerful vampires in the city, possibly the country." "Good," Sarah replied, surprised by her own calm. "Because he declared war on innocent people first." They made their way back to the Crimson Court in silence, both of them lost in thought about what lay ahead. The evidence they'd gathered was damning, but incomplete. Damien was free and dangerous, with resources they could only guess at. And somewhere in the city, people were still suffering in facilities they might never find. The council chamber was in chaos when they arrived. Vampires argued in small groups, their voices rising and falling in languages Sarah didn't recognize. At the center of it all, the three elders sat in grim conference, their expressions darker than storm clouds. "The evidence," Elder Blackwood said without preamble as Sarah and Michael approached the thrones. Sarah handed over the external drive, watching as Elder Ravencrest connected it to some kind of supernatural equivalent of a computer. The files appeared on screens that materialized out of thin air, their contents visible to the entire assembly. The reaction was immediate and visceral. Vampires who had been arguing moments before fell silent as they absorbed the scope of Damien's operations. Sarah heard gasps of horror, snarls of rage, and something that sounded like weeping from the darker corners of the chamber. "This is an abomination," Elder Nightshade said, his voice carrying across the chamber like thunder. "A betrayal of everything we claim to represent." "But it's not complete," Elder Blackwood added, his ancient eyes fixing on Sarah. "These files reference other facilities, other operations, but the details are missing. Damien told us the most sensitive information is stored elsewhere," Michael reported. "He's already moving to shut down exposed facilities and relocate critical operations." The chamber erupted in angry voices as vampires demanded action, justice, revenge. But it was Elder Ravencrest who cut through the chaos with a single word. "Enough." Silence fell instantly, and Sarah realized she was witnessing the kind of authority that came from centuries of absolute power. "The evidence before us proves Damien's guilt beyond question," Ravencrest continued. "But it also proves something else, that our isolation from the human world has allowed atrocities to flourish in the shadows." She stood from her throne, her gaze sweeping across the assembled vampires. For too long, we have governed through fear and secrecy. We have told ourselves that hiding from humanity was necessary for survival, but we have forgotten that survival without honor is merely existence. Sarah felt her heart beginning to race as she sensed where this was leading. The human Sarah Jenkins has shown us something we had forgotten, Elder Ravencrest said, turning to look directly at her. That courage does not require supernatural strength. That justice does not depend on political advantage. That sometimes the right thing to do is also the hardest thing to do. What are you proposing? Michael asked, though Sarah could see in his expression that he already knew. Change, Elder Blackwood said simply. Real change. Not just in how we deal with criminals like Damien, but in how we interact with the human world. Elder Nightshade rose from his throne, and when he spoke, his voice carried the weight of centuries. We propose to end the secrecy, to reveal ourselves to humanity, not as conquerors or predators, but as potential allies in building a better world. The chamber exploded in chaos again, vampires shouting over each other in dozens of languages. Sarah caught fragments of arguments, concerns about exposure, fears of persecution, anger at the very suggestion of equality with humans. It's madness, someone shouted. Humans will never accept us. They'll hunt us to extinction, another voice added. But through the chaos, Sarah heard other voices, younger vampires mostly, speaking of tired of hiding, of wanting to use their abilities to help rather than harm, of believing that coexistence was possible. The decision is not ours alone to make, Elder Ravencrest said, her voice somehow carrying over the tumult. This affects not just our clan, but all supernatural beings, the werewolf packs, the witch covens, the fae courts. All must have a voice in what comes next. And the humans? Sarah asked, her voice barely audible but somehow heard by everyone in the chamber. Do we get a voice too? The question silenced the room more effectively than any elder's command. Sarah could feel hundreds of eyes on her, could smell the mixture of curiosity, fear, and hope that filled the air. You have already used your voice, Elder Blackwood said quietly. You have spoken for justice, for the innocent, for the possibility of something better than what we have now. The question is whether others will listen. A new voice cut through the chamber, young, female, carrying an authority that made even the elders turn to listen. They will listen, the voice said, because they must. Sarah turned to see a figure emerging from the shadows at the chamber's edge. She was tall and elegant, with silver hair that seemed to glow in the torchlight, and eyes that held depths of wisdom and sorrow. Counselor Thorne, Michael said, inclining his head respectfully. I thought you were coordinating with our allies, Thorne finished. The werewolf packs are willing to consider revelation. The witch covens are divided but leaning toward support. The fae courts. She shrugged. The fae courts are being fae, which is to say unhelpful but not actively obstructive. She moved to the center of the chamber, her presence commanding attention from every vampire present. But more importantly, she continued, I've been in contact with certain human authorities, people in positions of power who have suspected our existence for years but lacked proof. They're willing to meet, to discuss terms, to explore the possibility of coexistence. What kind of terms? Sarah asked. Regulation, Thorne replied. Oversight, laws governing supernatural behavior, with enforcement mechanisms that protect both human and non-human interests. It won't be easy, and it won't be quick, but it's possible. And Damien? Michael asked. His operations, his human collaborators, will be exposed and prosecuted under both human and supernatural law, Elder Nightshade said firmly. The Sterling Corporation facilities will be raided, the victims will be freed and treated, and those responsible will face justice. Sarah felt a weight lifting from her chest, the first real hope she'd felt since this nightmare began. What about the people who've already been hurt? The ones with altered memories? Memory modification can be reversed, Thorne said gently. It's difficult, and not always complete, but possible. We'll do everything we can to help them recover their lives. And Emily? Sarah asked, the question that had been burning in her heart since this all began. Will she be safe? Michael stepped closer to her, his hand finding hers. She'll be safer than she's ever been, he said quietly. Because she'll be living in a world where monsters can't hide in the shadows anymore. Elder Ravencrest raised her hand, and the chamber fell silent again. The path ahead will not be easy, she said, her voice carrying to every corner of the vast space. There will be fear, resistance, violence from both sides. Some humans will never accept us. Some vampires will never accept them. But the alternative, continuing to live in secrecy while atrocities flourish in the darkness, is no longer acceptable. She turned to Sarah, and there was something almost like a bow in her gesture. You have shown us that courage is not the absence of fear, but action in spite of fear. That justice is not about power, but about protecting those who cannot protect themselves. That sometimes the most profound changes begin with the simplest acts of kindness. Sarah felt tears burning her eyes as she thought of that morning in the park. Was it really only days ago, when she and Emily had found a stranger in need and decided to help? Such a small thing, such an ordinary human response to suffering, and yet it had led to all of this. There's something else, she said, her voice carrying clearly despite her tears. Something Damien said about human collaborators, about government officials and police commissioners working with Sterling Corporation. The elders exchanged glances, and Sarah could see the calculation in their expressions. We know, Elder Blackwood said finally, and they will be dealt with as well. Corruption exists on both sides of the human-supernatural divide. True justice requires cleaning house everywhere. How long? Sarah asked. How long before this becomes real? Change of this magnitude takes time, Thorne replied. Months, possibly years of careful negotiation and preparation. But the first steps can begin immediately. She gestured toward the chamber's entrance, where Sarah could see figures waiting in the shadows. Humans, she realized with shock. People in suits and uniforms, carrying briefcases and badges, looking nervous but determined. The first meeting between human and supernatural authorities, Thorne explained, scheduled to begin in 1 hour. Sarah stared at the waiting humans, at the vampires around her, at the impossible scene unfolding before her eyes. I should be there, she said suddenly. For the meeting, as a witness, as someone who's seen both sides. Sarah, Michael said gently, you've already done more than anyone could ask. You have a daughter to get home to, a life to rebuild. I have a daughter to make the world safer for, Sarah corrected, and a life that's already been completely rebuilt, whether I wanted it or not. She looked around the chamber, at the faces watching her with expressions ranging from respect to curiosity to something that might have been hope. Besides, she added with a small smile, someone needs to make sure you supernatural types don't try to negotiate yourselves into positions of power over humans. We've had enough of that already. The laughter that rippled through the chamber was unlike anything Sarah had heard in the supernatural world. Warm, genuine, hopeful. The sound of people, human and vampire alike, beginning to believe that something better was possible. Elder Ravencrest stepped down from her throne, moving to stand directly in front of Sarah. "Sarah Jenkins," she said formally, "on behalf of the True Council and all vampires under our protection, I offer you a position as human liaison in the negotiations ahead. Your voice, your perspective, your courage, all will be needed in the days to come." Sarah thought of Emily, sleeping safely in Mrs. Rodriguez's apartment, trusting her mother to come home. She thought of all the other children who deserved to grow up in a world where monsters couldn't hide in the shadows. She thought of the families who had lost loved ones to Sterling Corporation, who deserved justice and answers. "I accept," she said simply. As the chamber began to empty, vampires and humans moving toward the meeting that would reshape both their worlds, Michael lingered beside Sarah. "Are you sure about this?" he asked quietly. "Once you're involved in supernatural politics, there's no going back to a normal life." Sarah looked at him, this man who had been a stranger in need, then a mystery, then a revelation, and finally something that felt like family. "Michael," she said gently, "I stopped having a normal life the moment I decided to help a stranger in the park. And you know what? I'm glad I did." She paused, thinking of everything that had led them to this moment. "Besides, normal is overrated. Emily and I have been surviving on the margins for years. Maybe it's time we tried thriving in the center of something important." Michael's smile was like sunrise after the longest night. "In that case," he said, offering her his arm, "shall we go change the world?" Sarah took his arm, feeling the strength and steadiness that had carried them both through the darkest hours. "Let's go change the world," she agreed. As they walked toward the meeting that would determine the future of human supernatural relations, Sarah caught a familiar scent in the air. Coffee and cinnamon, the smell of Mrs. Rodriguez's kitchen, the smell of home and safety and love. But this time, instead of making her homesick, the scent filled her with determination. She was fighting for that smell, for the right of families like hers to exist in safety, for a world where kindness to strangers didn't have to come with supernatural consequences. The last thing she heard as they entered the negotiation chamber was the sound of her phone buzzing with a text message. Emily, she realized, checking in from Mrs. Rodriguez's apartment. "Mom, when are you coming home? Mrs. R made extra flan for you." Sarah smiled as she typed back, "Soon, baby. I'm just helping some friends solve a really big problem. I love you more than all the stars in the sky." The response came immediately. "I love you too, Mom. Save some stars for me." As Sarah put her phone away and prepared to help negotiate the future of two species, she realized that Emily had it exactly right. There were plenty of stars for everyone, human and vampire alike. They just had to be brave enough to reach for them together. The meeting room was smaller than the grand chamber, but no less significant. Around a circular table sat humans and vampires, their eyes meeting across centuries of mistrust and fear. Sarah took her seat between Michael and a woman who introduced herself as FBI Director Martinez. Apparently, Sarah's bluff from the rooftop hadn't been as far from the truth as she'd thought. "Ladies and gentlemen," Elder Ravencrest said, her voice carrying the weight of history, "let us begin." And in that moment, as Sarah Jenkins, single mother, minimum wage worker, accidental revolutionary, Prepared to help reshape the world, she understood that sometimes the most extraordinary changes really did begin with the simplest acts of human kindness. The coffee in the meeting room was terrible, but the hope in the air was intoxicating. And for the first time in longer than she could remember, Sarah Jenkins was exactly where she belonged.